Admiral Marcus Thompson stood quietly at the bustling airport, his eyes scanning the crowd as he adjusted the strap of his carry-on bag. Dressed in a simple navy blue blazer and slacks, he looked like any other traveler rushing to catch their flight. There was nothing flashy about him, no medals pinned to his chest, no uniform to announce his rank. He preferred it that way. After years of serving in the U.S. Navy, Admiral Thompson had learned that blending in often made life easier, especially when traveling. It allowed him to avoid unnecessary attention and enjoy the rare moments of peace away from his demanding duties. Today, however, peace seemed elusive. Marcus had just returned from a grueling overseas assignment, one that left him physically exhausted and emotionally drained. For weeks, he'd been sleeping in tents, eating field rations, and navigating some of the most challenging terrains imaginable. Now, finally heading home, all he wanted was a comfortable seat on the plane where he could stretch out, close his eyes, and let the hum of the engines lull him into much-needed rest. That's why he'd splurged on a first-class ticket this time, a small luxury he felt he'd earned after months of relentless service. As he approached the gate, Marcus pulled out his boarding pass and handed it over to the gate agent with a polite smile. The young woman behind the counter glanced at the paper, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard as she processed his information. Marcus waited patiently, shifting his weight slightly from one foot to the other. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of handing back the boarding pass with a cheerful, "Have a great flight," the agent paused, furrowing her brow as though confused by what she saw on her screen. "I'm sorry, sir," she said hesitantly, looking up at him. "It seems there's been a problem with your reservation." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to place him or figure out who he was. Marcus frowned but kept his tone calm. "What kind of problem?" he asked, leaning forward slightly to get a better view of her screen. The agent hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Well," she began, glancing down again before meeting his gaze. "It looks like your seat has been downgraded to economy. I don't know how it happened, but first class is completely booked now." Marcus blinked, taken aback. Downgraded? How could that even happen? He remembered booking the ticket himself through the airline's official website. He double-checked everything before confirming the purchase. Seat selection, meal preferences, everything. Yet here he was, being told he wouldn't be sitting in the section he paid for. A flicker of frustration crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a neutral expression. "Is there anything you can do to fix this?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The agent shook her head apologetically. "I'm really sorry, sir, but there's nothing available in first class right now. Economy is the best we can offer." She offered him a tight-lipped smile, as if hoping he'd accept the situation without further questions. For a moment, Marcus considered pressing the issue. He could have easily pulled out his military ID and revealed his rank, demanding an explanation or resolution. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the realization that doing so might make things worse. Revealing his status as a high-ranking naval officer could lead to awkwardness, or worse, accusations of entitlement. So instead, he nodded slowly, accepting the downgrade with quiet resignation. "All right," he said softly, tucking the boarding pass back into his pocket. "Thank you." Without another word, he stepped aside to allow the next passenger to approach the counter. As he moved toward the boarding line, Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment, and something deeper, harder to name. Was it suspicion? Resentment? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that this didn't feel like a simple mistake. Something about the agent's demeanor, the way she avoided making eye contact, the dismissive tone in her voice, left him uneasy. Boarding the plane, Marcus found himself ushered to the very back of the cabin, where the narrow seats were crammed, together like sardines in a tin. He settled into his assigned spot by the window, stowing his bag in the overhead compartment and buckling his seatbelt. Around him, passengers chatted animatedly, oblivious to his internal turmoil. A businessman in the row ahead bragged loudly about his latest deal, while a family nearby laughed and passed snacks between them. Everyone seemed carefree, unaware of the tension simmering beneath Marcus's composed exterior. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus tried to distract himself by pulling out his laptop. On the screen were documents related to his recent mission, reports, analyses, and recommendations he needed to review before submitting to his superiors. Focusing on work usually helped him push aside distractions, but today his mind kept wandering back to the incident at the gate. Why had this happened? Was it truly an innocent error, or was there more to it? Marcus had faced prejudice before. It came with the territory of being a black man in a predominantly white institution. Over the years, he'd learned to navigate those challenges with grace and resilience. But this felt different. This wasn't about someone questioning his abilities or doubting his qualifications. It was about being treated as though he didn't belong, even in a space he'd rightfully paid for. And that stung. Despite his discomfort, Marcus refused to let bitterness take hold. He reminded himself of the countless obstacles he'd overcome to reach his current position. Born into a modest household, he'd worked tirelessly to excel in school, earn scholarships, and eventually join the Navy. Rising through the ranks hadn't been easy, but every promotion, every commendation, had been hard-won. He wasn't about to let one disappointing encounter tarnish his sense of accomplishment. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus closed his laptop and gazed out the window. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the runway. He took a deep breath, letting the familiar hum of the engines ground him. Whatever lay ahead, he decided he would handle it with dignity. After all, true strength wasn't measured by how loudly you demanded respect. It was shown in how you carried yourself when others failed to give it. And so, as the aircraft lifted off the ground, Marcus resolved to make the best of the situation. Little did he know the events of this flight would soon take an unexpected turn, one that would test not only his patience but also his principles. The plane climbed steadily into the sky, its engines roaring as it ascended through layers of clouds. Marcus leaned back in his seat, trying to find a comfortable position in the cramped economy section. The armrests dug into his sides, and the lack of legroom made stretching nearly impossible. He adjusted his posture several times, shifting his weight from one hip to the other, but nothing seemed to help. It was going to be a long flight. Around him, the cabin buzzed with activity. Passengers settled into their seats, stowing away bags, adjusting their headphones, or flipping through in-flight magazines. A toddler in the row ahead giggled uncontrollably as her mother handed her a coloring book and crayons. Across the aisle, an older couple whispered softly to each other, their hands intertwined. Everyone appeared to be settling in for the journey, seemingly unfazed by the turbulence that occasionally rocked the plane. Marcus glanced toward the front of the cabin, where the first-class section began. Through the gap between seats, he could see passengers reclining in wide, plush chairs, sipping champagne or nibbling on gourmet snacks served by attentive flight attendants. The contrast between their experience and his own was stark. While they enjoyed spacious comfort, he was squeezed into a narrow seat barely wide enough for his shoulders. It wasn't envy that gnawed at him. It was the principle of the matter. He had paid for first class, yet here he was, relegated to the back of the plane without explanation. As the initial climb leveled off and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Marcus decided to distract himself. Opening his laptop once again, he pulled up the files he needed to review. They were reports detailing recent operations he'd overseen during his deployment, complex missions that required precision, teamwork, and strategic thinking. Normally, diving into work would have been enough to occupy his mind completely, but today, concentration eluded him. His thoughts kept circling back to the incident at the gate. What bothered Marcus most wasn't just the downgrade itself. It was the way it had unfolded. The gate agent's dismissive tone, her reluctance to investigate further, and the overall lack of accountability all pointed to something deeper than a simple, clerical error. Had she judged him based on appearances? Did his casual attire and unassuming demeanor lead her to assume he didn't belong in first class? These questions lingered uncomfortably in his mind, refusing to fade away. Determined to push aside his frustration, Marcus focused on the task at hand. He scrolled through the documents, jotting down notes and highlighting key sections. But even as he worked, his attention was drawn to the conversations happening around him. A man 2 rows ahead was boasting loudly about his business ventures, using terms like venture capital and market disruption. Beside him, a woman nodded enthusiastically, chiming in with anecdotes about her own entrepreneurial successes. Their confidence filled the air, almost tangible in its energy. Closer to Marcus, a young mother struggled to calm her restless child, who was growing increasingly agitated by the confined space. "We'll be there soon," she murmured soothingly, brushing hair away from the little girl's face. The child whimpered, clutching a stuffed animal tightly. Watching them, Marcus felt a pang of empathy. Traveling with kids must be exhausting, especially on a crowded flight like this one. Just as Marcus was beginning to lose himself in these observations, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A flight attendant approached his row, balancing a tray of drinks. She smiled warmly at the passengers seated nearby, offering them cans of soda and tiny bottles of water. When she reached Marcus, she paused, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" she asked, her voice cheerful but professional. "No, thank you," Marcus replied politely, shaking his head. He gestured toward his laptop. "I'm good for now." The flight attendant nodded, but instead of moving on immediately, she lingered for a moment longer. Her gaze drifted to the stack of papers spread across his tray table, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Marcus caught her looking and offered a small, reassuring smile. "Just catching up on some work," he explained lightly. "Oh, of course," she said, returning the smile. There was something hesitant in her expression, as though she wanted to ask more but thought better of it. Finally, she gave a quick nod and continued down the aisle, distributing drinks to the remaining passengers. Though the exchange was brief, it left Marcus wondering. What had caught her attention? Was it the official-looking nature of the documents? Or perhaps the fact that someone seated in economy was so engrossed in paperwork while others relaxed or entertained themselves? Whatever it was, the encounter planted a seed of intrigue, not just in the flight attendant's mind but also in Marcus's own. Meanwhile, near the front of the plane, Captain Richard Hayes sat in the cockpit, monitoring the aircraft's systems. As a seasoned pilot with decades of experience under his belt, Hayes prided himself on running a smooth operation. Yet despite his focus on safety and efficiency, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was unfolding in the cabin behind him. Earlier, during pre-flight checks, Hayes had overheard snippets of conversation among the crew. One of the flight attendants mentioned a passenger in economy who seemed out of place, someone carrying important-looking documents and behaving with quiet authority. At the time, Hayes hadn't thought much of it. Oddities were common in the world of air travel. But now, as he reflected on the description, a memory stirred deep within him. Years ago, Hayes had participated in joint military exercises alongside Admiral Marcus Thompson. Though they hadn't interacted extensively, Hayes remembered the Admiral vividly, a man of remarkable poise and intelligence, someone who commanded respect without ever demanding it. Could it be possible that the mysterious passenger in economy was none other than Admiral Thompson? Curiosity piqued, Hayes decided to investigate further once the plane reached cruising altitude. For now, he focused on ensuring a safe and stable flight, guiding the aircraft smoothly through patches of turbulence. But as the minutes ticked by, anticipation built within him. If his hunch proved correct, this ordinary flight might turn into something far more memorable. Back in the economy section, Marcus remained unaware of the interest he'd sparked. He continued working diligently, occasionally glancing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting soft golden light across the horizon. Despite the discomfort of his surroundings, Marcus found solace in the view, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the countless possibilities it held. As the flight progressed, the initial chaos of boarding gave way to a quieter rhythm. Passengers settled into routines. Some slept, others watched movies, and a few chatted quietly with their neighbors. Marcus, however, stayed alert, his mind still wrestling with unresolved questions. Why had he been denied access to first class? And what did this say about the assumptions people made based on appearances? Little did Marcus know. Answers, or at least clarity, were closer than he realized. Within hours, the situation would escalate in ways he couldn't have anticipated, forcing him to confront not only the biases of those around him, but also his own beliefs about fairness and dignity. For now, though, he remained patient, trusting that the truth would reveal itself in due time. As the plane cruised at its designated altitude, the initial turbulence began to ease, replaced by a steady hum of engines that lulled many passengers into a state of calm. Marcus closed his laptop for a moment, leaning back in his seat and closing his eyes. He tried to relax, letting the vibrations of the aircraft resonate through him like a distant melody. But just as he started to drift off, a sudden jolt shook the plane, startling everyone aboard. The turbulence returned with a vengeance, sending cups rattling in their holders and forcing the flight attendants to grab onto seatbacks for balance. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin as passengers gripped their armrests, some muttering prayers under their breath while others exchanged nervous glances. Even those who had been sleeping woke abruptly, their faces etched with concern. Seated beside Marcus was a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with wide, frightened eyes. She clutched the edges of her seat tightly, her knuckles turning white. When another sharp bump rocked the plane, she let out a small whimper, drawing Marcus's attention. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or give her space. But then he remembered how comforting it could be to hear a reassuring voice during moments of uncertainty. "Hey," Marcus said softly, leaning toward her. "You okay?" The woman turned to look at him, her expression a mix of fear and embarrassment. I don't like flying," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "And this turbulence isn't helping." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "It's rough right now, but we'll be fine. This happens sometimes, it's completely normal." She gave him a skeptical look, clearly unconvinced. "Are you sure? It feels intense." Smiling gently, Marcus leaned closer so she wouldn't have to strain to hear him over the noise. "Trust me, I've been on planes where the turbulence was much worse than this. The pilots know what they're doing, they'll get us through it." Her brow furrowed. "How do you know? Are you a pilot?" Marcus chuckled lightly. "No, not a pilot. But I've spent a lot of time traveling for work, including in less than ideal conditions. Planes are built to handle this kind of thing." He paused, noticing her still anxious expression. "If it helps, I can tell you a bit about my experiences. You might feel better knowing that even chaotic flights usually end safely." For the next several minutes, Marcus shared stories from his career in the Navy. He spoke about missions that required landing on aircraft carriers in stormy seas, describing the precision and teamwork involved. He recounted tales of long-haul, military flights over deserts and oceans, emphasizing how resilient airplanes were designed to be. As he talked, the woman's grip on the armrest loosened and a faint smile appeared on her face. "You must have seen some crazy stuff," she said, her tone lighter now. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus replied with a grin. "But every time, the training and preparation paid off. Flying is one of the safest ways to travel, believe it or not." By the time the turbulence subsided, the woman seemed significantly calmer. She thanked Marcus profusely, admitting that his words had made a big difference. "I didn't catch your name," she said shyly. "Marcus," he replied, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you." "I'm Sarah," she responded, shaking his hand firmly. "Thanks again for keeping me sane back there." "No problem," Marcus said warmly. "Happy to help." Their brief connection lifted Marcus's spirits, momentarily distracting him from the frustration of being seated in economy. Yet as the cabin settled into a quieter rhythm once more, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to the earlier incident at the gate. He wondered if Sarah, or anyone else on the plane, would react differently if they knew who he really was. Would revealing his rank change how people treated him? Or would it only reinforce the biases he suspected had led to the downgrade in the first place? While Marcus pondered these questions, Captain Richard Hayes finally decided to step out of the cockpit. After ensuring the plane was stable and secure, he unbuckled his seatbelt and walked down the narrow aisle, scanning the rows of passengers. His curiosity about the mysterious man in economy hadn't faded. In fact, it had grown stronger. As he moved through the cabin, Hayes kept an eye out for someone matching the description the flight attendant had given him. A well-dressed black man engrossed in paperwork, exuding a quiet authority. When Hayes reached the back of the plane, his gaze landed on Marcus almost immediately. At first glance, the man looked unremarkable, just another traveler trying to make the best of a cramped flight. But something about his posture, the way he carried himself, triggered a memory deep within Hayes. Could this really be Admiral Thompson? Hayes approached cautiously, stopping near Marcus's row. Leaning down slightly, he whispered, "Excuse me, sir. Are you Admiral Thompson?" Marcus looked up, startled by the unexpected question. For a split second, he considered denying it, maintaining his low profile. But when he recognized the speaker, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Captain Hayes?" he asked. His voice, tinged with disbelief. Hayes grinned, his suspicions confirmed. "It is you. What are you doing all the way back here?" he asked, gesturing to the economy section. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "Long story short, I was downgraded at the gate. Apparently, first class is full." The sarcasm in his tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Hayes frowned, his cheerful demeanor fading. "That's unacceptable," he muttered, glancing around the cabin as though searching for answers. Turning back to Marcus, he added, "Let me see what I can do about this." Before Marcus could protest, Hayes signaled to a nearby flight attendant and whispered instructions into her ear. The attendant nodded briskly and hurried forward, disappearing into the first-class section. Hayes straightened up, addressing Marcus directly. "Consider this our apology, Admiral. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of treatment." Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. On one hand, accepting the offer felt like validating the very system that had wronged him, a system that judged people based on appearances, rather than merit. On the other hand, refusing the gesture might come across as stubborn or prideful, potentially undermining the message he wanted to send. Ultimately, he decided to accept, not because he craved special treatment, but because doing so would allow him to address the issue publicly and hold the airline accountable later. With the entire cabin watching, Marcus gathered his belongings and followed the flight attendant to the front of the plane. Whispers broke out among the passengers as they speculated about the man receiving such deference. Some assumed he was a celebrity, while others guessed he might be a high-ranking government official. No one seemed to suspect the truth, that the unassuming man in the Navy blazer was one of the most decorated officers in the U.S. Navy. Once seated in first class, Marcus turned to Hayes, who had accompanied him, to ensure the transition went smoothly. "Thank you for stepping in," Marcus said sincerely. "But I hope you understand why this situation bothers me." Hayes nodded gravely. "Of course. I'm sorry you had to go through that. We'll make sure the airline investigates this properly after we land." Marcus appreciated the gesture, but he knew apologies weren't enough. Systemic issues like this required action, not just words. Still, he chose to focus on the positives, for now, at least. Settling into his new seat, he took a deep breath, allowing himself to relax for the first time since boarding the flight. Around him, the atmosphere in first class was markedly different from the chaos of economy. Passengers reclined in spacious chairs, sipping complimentary drinks and chatting amiably. Attendants moved gracefully between rows, offering warm smiles and attentive service. Despite the comfort, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this upgrade wasn't just about making amends. It was also about restoring dignity. And while he appreciated the effort, he knew the real challenge lay ahead, addressing the underlying biases that had led to this situation in the first place. As the plane soared onward, Marcus resolved to use this experience as an opportunity to speak out, to educate, and to inspire change. Because true leadership wasn't just about commanding respect. It was about using your platform to uplift others and create a fairer, more inclusive world. The moment Marcus settled into his first-class seat, The contrast between this section and economy was unmistakable. The chair he now occupied was wide and plush, with enough legroom to stretch out comfortably. A soft blanket lay folded neatly beside him, and a flight attendant appeared almost instantly, offering him a glass of sparkling water or a freshly brewed cup of coffee. It was a far cry from the cramped space he'd endured earlier, where even shifting positions required careful maneuvering to avoid disturbing his neighbors. Despite the luxury surrounding him, Marcus couldn't fully relax. His mind kept circling, back to the events that had led him here. The downgrade at the gate, the dismissive tone of the agent, and the assumptions that likely played a role in how he was treated. He knew it wasn't just about him. Countless others had faced similar situations, their dignity questioned because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what belonged in first class. What made this incident particularly frustrating was its subtlety. There was no overt hostility, no blatant refusal, just a quiet assumption that seemed rooted in bias. As Marcus sipped his water, Captain Hayes took a seat across from him, leaning forward slightly to continue their conversation. "I'm really sorry this happened," Hayes said earnestly, his voice low enough not to draw attention from nearby passengers. "You shouldn't have been put in that position." Marcus nodded slowly, appreciating the sincerity in Hayes's words. "It's not your fault," he replied, keeping his tone measured. "But it does make you wonder, why did this happen in the first place? I followed all the rules, paid for my ticket, showed up on time. None of that mattered when it came down to it." Hayes frowned, clearly troubled by the implications. "Do you think it was intentional?" he asked cautiously, searching Marcus's face for clues. Marcus hesitated before answering. "I don't know if it was intentional in the sense of malice," he admitted. "But I do think there were assumptions being made about who I am, what I deserve. When people look at me, especially dressed like this, they don't see an admiral. They see something else." Hayes absorbed the comment, nodding thoughtfully. "That's exactly why I wanted to step in," he said. "Because once I realized it was you, I knew this wasn't just a random mistake. This was bigger than one person or one flight." The two men fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the hum of conversation filled the air as first-class passengers chatted casually about vacations, business deals, and weekend plans. To an outsider, it might have seemed like any other flight, but for Marcus, the weight of the situation lingered heavily. Breaking the silence, Hayes leaned closer again. "What can we do about it?" he asked. "After we land, I mean. Do you want me to report this to the airline, or would you prefer to handle it yourself?" Marcus considered the question carefully. On one hand, he appreciated Hayes's willingness to take action. It showed solidarity and a genuine desire to right the wrong. But on the other hand, Marcus understood that this wasn't just about him. If real change were to happen, it needed to come from within the system itself. "I think both," he finally said. "You should definitely bring this up with the airline management. They need to know that incidents like this aren't acceptable. But I'll also address it personally after we land. Sometimes hearing it directly from the person affected makes a stronger impact." Hayes agreed, promising to follow through on his end. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Marcus found himself reflecting on the broader significance of what had transpired. For years, he'd worked tirelessly to break barriers and challenge stereotypes, not just within the military, but in every aspect of his life. Moments like this reminded him how far society still had to go, and how important it was to keep pushing forward. Before long, curiosity began to ripple through the first-class cabin. Passengers seated near Marcus started glancing in his direction, whispering among themselves. Some recognized him immediately, perhaps from news articles or televised ceremonies honoring military leaders. Others simply sensed that there was something extraordinary about the man who had been upgraded mid-flight. Whatever the reason, it wasn't long before introductions began. A middle-aged woman sitting across the aisle leaned over with a warm smile. "Excuse me, Admiral," she said respectfully, "but may I ask, are you Admiral Marcus Thompson?" Marcus turned to her, returning the smile. "Yes, ma'am, that's correct." Her eyes lit up with admiration. "I thought so. My husband served under you years ago." He speaks very highly of you. He always says you're one of the most inspiring leaders he's ever met. Marcus felt a swell of gratitude at the compliment. Thank you, he replied humbly. Please tell him. I said hello and thank him for his service. The interaction sparked a chain reaction. Soon, several passengers approached Marcus, eager to express their appreciation or share stories of their own connections to the military. One man recounted how his son had joined the Navy after hearing Marcus speak at a recruitment event. Another woman described how her father, also a veteran, admired Marcus's commitment to diversity and inclusion within the ranks. Throughout these exchanges, Marcus remained gracious, listening intently, and responding with thoughtful insights. He used the opportunity to talk about leadership, resilience, and the importance of breaking down barriers, not just in the armed forces, but in everyday life. We all have biases, he explained during one conversation, but recognizing them is the first step toward overcoming them. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about creating environments where everyone feels valued and respected. His words resonated deeply with those around him. By the time dinner service began, Marcus had transformed from a quiet traveler into a source of inspiration for nearly everyone in first class. Even the flight attendants, who initially seemed hesitant to engage, found themselves drawn to his calm demeanor and wisdom. One attendant lingered after delivering his meal, asking if he had any advice for dealing with difficult passengers. Marcus chuckled softly, acknowledging that patience and empathy went a long way in diffusing tension. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in first class grew increasingly convivial. Passengers who had started the flight as strangers now bonded over shared experiences and newfound respect for the man seated among them. For Marcus, it was a reminder of the power of connection, the way small acts of kindness and understanding could bridge divides and foster unity. Yet beneath the surface, Marcus remained acutely aware of the larger issues at play. While he appreciated the warmth and admiration of his fellow travelers, he knew that true progress required more than polite gestures or fleeting recognition. It demanded systemic change, accountability, and a collective effort to dismantle the biases that shape so many interactions, both conscious and unconscious. By the time the plane began its descent, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for the support he'd received, frustration over the circumstances that brought him here, and determination to turn this experience into a catalyst for meaningful dialogue. As the wheels touched down and the cabin erupted in applause, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and prepared to disembark. Little did he know the journey was far from over. What awaited him on the ground would test not only his resolve but also his faith in humanity's capacity for growth and transformation. As the plane taxied to its designated gate, Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to disembark. The flight attendants had already begun their final checks, ensuring that everything was in order before opening the doors. Captain Hayes stood near the cockpit, waiting to personally escort Marcus off the aircraft, a gesture of respect and solidarity. Despite the lingering frustration over the earlier downgrade, Marcus appreciated the captain's efforts to make things right. When the door finally opened and the passengers began filing out, Marcus followed Hayes toward the front of the plane. Stepping into the jet bridge, he noticed a subtle shift in the energy around him. Passengers who recognized him nodded respectfully or offered quiet words of thanks as they passed by. Some even paused briefly to shake his hand, expressing admiration for his service and leadership. It was clear that the conversations Marcus had shared during the flight had left an impression, not just on individuals, but on the collective mood of those aboard. Once inside the terminal, Hayes turned to Marcus with a firm handshake. "Thank you for your patience today," he said sincerely. "And please know I'll be following up with the airline about this. You deserve better." Marcus nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I appreciate that, Captain. And thank you for stepping in when you did. But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about making sure something like this doesn't happen again." Hayes agreed wholeheartedly. "Absolutely. We need to hold people accountable and push for real change." With that, the two men parted ways, Hayes heading back toward the gate area to complete post-flight duties, and Marcus, continuing onward to baggage claim. The walk through the terminal gave Marcus time to reflect on the day's events. He couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the treatment he'd received at the gate and the warmth shown to him now. In economy class, he'd been dismissed without explanation. In first class, he was celebrated and admired. The difference wasn't lost on him. It highlighted the biases that often influenced how people were treated based on appearances, assumptions, or perceived status. By the time Marcus reached the baggage carousel, his thoughts had crystallized into a plan. This incident wasn't going to end here. He knew it was an opportunity to address systemic issues within the airline industry and beyond. Bias wasn't unique to one company or one person. It was a pervasive problem that affected countless individuals every day. If anything positive were to come from this experience, it would require action, not just acknowledgement. While waiting for his luggage, Marcus pulled out his phone and drafted a message to a close friend who worked in diversity and inclusion consulting. "Hey, do you have time to chat later?" he typed. "I want to talk about something that happened today and how we can turn it into a teaching moment." Sending the text, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. It was about creating awareness and sparking meaningful conversations. His suitcase eventually appeared on the conveyor belt, and Marcus hoisted it onto a cart before heading toward the exit. As he pushed the cart through the crowded terminal, he spotted a familiar face waiting near the arrivals area. Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez, a trusted colleague from his naval unit. She had traveled to the same destination for a separate assignment and had offered to give him a ride home. "Admiral," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "How was your flight?" Marcus smiled faintly as he approached her. "It was eventful," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "Let's grab some coffee before we head out. I think you'll find the story interesting." Elena raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she grabbed the handle of the cart and steered it toward a nearby cafe. Once seated with steaming cups of coffee in hand, Marcus recounted the details of his journey, from the unexpected downgrade at the gate to the turbulence that sparked a connection with a nervous passenger, and finally to the intervention by Captain Hayes. Throughout the retelling, Elena listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to admiration. "That's incredible," she said when he finished. "But also infuriating. How could they treat you like that? You're Admiral Marcus Thompson." Marcus chuckled dryly. "Exactly. That's the point. They didn't see Admiral Marcus Thompson. They saw a black man in a blazer, and that was enough to raise doubts." Elena shook her head, clearly frustrated on his behalf. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to use this as an opportunity," Marcus explained. "First, I'll file a formal complaint with the airline, not because I want revenge, but because accountability matters. Second, I'll share my experience publicly, not to shame anyone, but to highlight the importance of addressing unconscious bias. And third," he paused, leaning forward slightly, "I'll work with experts like our mutual friend in diversity consulting to create training programs that help organizations recognize and overcome these challenges." Elena nodded approvingly. "That sounds like the right approach. People respect you, Admiral. They'll listen if you speak up. This could lead to real change." Over the next few days, Marcus followed through on his plan. He submitted a detailed report to the airline, outlining the sequence of events and requesting an investigation into potential discriminatory practices. To his surprise, the airline responded quickly, apologizing profusely and promising to take immediate action. They assured him that the gate agent involved would receive additional training, and they committed to implementing new protocols designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. Encouraged by this response, Marcus decided to go a step further. He reached out to several media outlets, offering to share his story in interviews. His goal wasn't to vilify the airline or its employees, but to shed light on the broader issue of bias in customer service and beyond. When reporters asked why he chose to speak publicly, Marcus's answer was simple yet powerful. Because silence perpetuates the problem. If we don't talk about these moments, nothing changes. The interviews resonated deeply with audiences across the country. Many viewers expressed shock and outrage over what Marcus had endured, while others shared their own stories of being mistreated due to race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about systemic inequality, and hashtags like type bias in action and fair treatment for all began trending. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight, not as a decorated military officer, but as a symbol of resilience and advocacy. Despite the attention, Marcus remained grounded. He continued working closely with diversity consultants to develop workshops tailored specifically for airlines and other industries. These sessions focused not only on identifying bias, but also on fostering empathy and understanding among employees. Marcus believed that true progress required more than policies. It demanded a cultural shift, one rooted in compassion and respect. Word of Marcus's efforts spread quickly, earning him invitations to speak at conferences and panel discussions. Each appearance reinforced his message that dignity and fairness should never depend on appearances or assumptions. Audiences responded with standing ovations, inspired by his ability to turn adversity into action. Back at work, Marcus's colleagues rallied around him, proud of the way he had handled the situation. Some admitted they had faced similar challenges but hadn't known how to address them. Seeing Marcus take a stand gave them courage to speak up as well. Slowly, but surely, a ripple effect began to form. One conversation, one policy change, one act of advocacy at a time. Looking back on the experience months later, Marcus realized it had taught him something profound. Adversity, no matter how painful, could become a catalyst for growth, if approached with grace and determination. What started as a frustrating encounter at an airport gate had evolved into a movement for change, reminding everyone involved that even the smallest actions could spark monumental transformations. In the weeks and months following his experience on the flight, Admiral Marcus Thompson became more than just a decorated naval officer. He transformed into a symbol of resilience and quiet strength, a figure who could turn personal adversity into a platform for meaningful change. The story of how he was denied first class only to reveal his rank later resonated far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin. It sparked conversations in living rooms, boardrooms, and classrooms across the nation, igniting discussions about bias, fairness, and systemic inequality. Marcus's decision to speak publicly about the incident proved pivotal. His interviews were not confrontational or accusatory. Instead, they were thoughtful and reflective, focusing on solutions rather than blame. In one particularly memorable appearance on a morning talk show, Marcus shared his perspective with calm authority. "I wasn't angry at the gate agent," he explained. "She may have been acting on unconscious biases, assumptions we all carry without realizing it. What matters is what happens next. Do we acknowledge those biases? Do we work to overcome them?" His words struck a chord with viewers, many of whom reached out to share their own stories. Some described being profiled while traveling, others recounted instances of discrimination in the workplace, and still others admitted harboring prejudices they hadn't fully confronted until hearing Marcus's message. For countless people, his openness created a safe space to reflect on uncomfortable truths and take steps toward growth. The airline itself took swift action after Marcus filed his complaint. Not only did they discipline the gate agent involved, but they also launched a company-wide initiative aimed at addressing unconscious bias among employees. Training sessions were mandatory for all staff, from ticket counter agents to pilots. These workshops weren't just lectures, they included interactive exercises designed to help participants recognize their own assumptions and consider how those assumptions influence their behavior. To ensure accountability, the airline partnered with external experts, including diversity consultants recommended by Marcus. Together, they developed tools to track progress, such as anonymous surveys where passengers could rate their experiences based on perceived fairness and respect. Within 6 months, customer satisfaction scores showed noticeable improvement, not just in terms of service quality, but also in feelings of inclusivity and equity. For Marcus, This outcome reinforced his belief in the power of dialogue and education. Change doesn't happen overnight, he often said during speaking engagements. But if we're willing to listen, learn, and adapt, we can create environments where everyone feels valued. As his advocacy work gained momentum, Marcus found himself invited to participate in high-profile panels and conferences. One event, hosted by a prominent global organization focused on leadership and inclusion, brought together CEOs, activists, and policymakers from around the world. Sitting alongside luminaries like Nobel laureates and tech innovators, Marcus delivered a keynote address that left attendees inspired and motivated. Leadership isn't about titles or uniforms, he told the audience. It's about using your position to uplift others. When someone tells you they've been treated unfairly, don't dismiss their experience. Listen, learn, and then ask yourself, what can I do to make things better? His speech earned a standing ovation, solidifying his reputation as a voice of reason and compassion in turbulent times. Yet despite the accolades, Marcus remained humble. He knew that true leadership wasn't about seeking recognition. It was about serving others and leaving the world better than you found it. Back home, Marcus continued balancing his naval duties with his advocacy work. His colleagues noticed a shift in the way people interacted with him, not because of fear or obligation, but because of genuine admiration. Younger sailors, especially, looked up to him as a role model. They saw in him not just a commander, but a mentor who cared deeply about their well-being and development. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Marcus sat down with a group of junior officers over dinner. The conversation turned to challenges they faced both personally and professionally. One young woman spoke candidly about feeling overlooked during promotions, despite her qualifications. Another shared frustrations about microaggressions he encountered daily. Rather than offering quick fixes, Marcus listened intently, asking questions and encouraging them to articulate their goals and aspirations. "You're not alone," he assured them. "Every generation faces obstacles. But remember, you have the power to shape the future. Speak up when something feels wrong. Advocate for yourselves and for each other, and never underestimate the impact of leading by example." His advice resonated deeply with the group, sparking a lively discussion about strategies for overcoming adversity. By the end of the meal, there was a palpable sense of camaraderie and determination in the air. For Marcus, moments like these reaffirmed why he had chosen to stay engaged, to inspire others to rise above setbacks and strive for excellence. Outside the military, Marcus's influence extended to communities nationwide. Schools began incorporating lessons about unconscious bias into their curricula, using his story as a case study. Corporations adopted similar training programs, recognizing that fostering inclusive cultures benefited not only employees, but also bottom lines. Even social media played a role, amplifying grassroots movements dedicated to promoting equality and understanding. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast in his mission. He understood that systemic change required sustained effort that went beyond headlines and hashtags. It meant showing up consistently, whether through speeches, workshops, or private conversations. It meant modeling the behaviors he hoped to see in others: patience, humility, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Looking back on everything that had transpired since that fateful flight, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. What could have been a disheartening experience had instead become an opportunity to make a difference. And while he knew there was still much work to be done, he took solace in knowing that progress, no matter how incremental, was worth celebrating. In silent, quieter moments, Marcus would sit by the window of his home, gazing out at the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly before him, vast and limitless, a reminder of the possibilities ahead. Though storms might arise, they always gave way to clearer skies. That was life's rhythm, its promise. Challenges would come, but so too would opportunities to grow stronger, wiser, and kinder. And so, Admiral Marcus Thompson pressed onward, driven by the belief that every person deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. His journey, from the cramped seat in economy class to becoming a beacon of hope and change, proved that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. For Marcus, the destination wasn't perfection, it was progress. And in that pursuit, he found purpose.